Okay, hi everybody. Delighted to be here this morning to facilitate this session on understanding autism and neurodiversity. As Rachel said, my name is Zara Doyle. Some of you will have met me last year at a number of different networking events that we had with the National Youth Council. Um, so I am the training manager on the As I Am team. But I'm coming here today with a number of different hats. I'm an autistic person. I also have a diagnosis of ADHD, and I'm also a parent to a very neurodiverse household. So I have my eldest just turned 18, and he has a diagnosis of autism and an intellectual disability. So we have really kind of been through a lot of I suppose, different kind of transitions throughout life, the education system, the health system, you name it, we've probably kind of come up against it at some point. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some really keen insights today into neuroaffirmative youth practice. Um, I've worked also in the area of autism for the past 15 years. I'm with As I Am since 2021, and working with lots of different communities in a huge number of different contexts. So right from early years up to adulthood, in corporates, in education, um, outreach centers, um, in hospital situations. I've probably encountered more than I ever expected to as the training manager, with lots of different kind of contexts as to how we can become autism friendly in Ireland. Um, so before we kind of get stuck into the information that you came here today for, I'll just give you a brief overview of what we actually do within As I Am, just so you have an idea if you have, families that you need to signpost certain things to. So we're Ireland's autism charity, and we are dedicated to removing all of those barriers that might be faced by autistic people and also their families in Irish society. So it's all about giving people the same chance. Adam Harris is our absolute Trojan of a CEO who has really been actively working within the community to alleviate all of those accessibility issues, to create a more just society for autistic people. He established As I Am in 2014. He started writing blogs as an autistic person, talking about, how he was treated as an autistic person in school and in different relationships and things like that. So there was so much to be taken from that, and it's really snowballed since then because lots of people have identified that actually they have similar experiences, or they also have a passion for advocacy in this space. Um, so, sorry, before I go into our introduction, so these are just some of the things that we provide now. So our autism information line is funded by the HSE. One of the only things I can say as an autistic person that is a really positive experience around being autistic. There's free legal advice, there's autism specific support and information. Uh, if you're looking for a child's school place, if you're looking for support in the workplace, if you are an SNA wondering how to support an autistic child, there's lots of different reasons why you would call the info line. There's also instant messaging if you're not a fan of calling up an information line and having a two-way conversation. So we allow for things like language processing delays, or any different needs that you might have. You can also email us at support@asiam.ie. And we have a huge amount of skill within that information line. We have a casework manager that will work with families on a one-to-one basis. We've also got a barrister that heads our community support. We've also got a speech and language therapist, an occupational therapist, lots of different pools of expertise within the phone line. And we also have autistic people, which is the most important piece of As I Am's kind of cogs within the machine, because it's all about embracing autistic advocacy and listening to autistic people all over the country. So, one of our initiatives then is the Autism ID cards, which is a great tool for families to advocate if they're out in public, if they're going to the zoo, for example, going to the airport, looking for the important flyer lanyards and things like that that you can apply for. You can provide the ID card as a form of ID. Lots of places will look for a diagnostic report, whereas in order to get your ID card with As I Am, you need to have your proof of diagnosis. So that gives you less things to carry around with you. You don't have to bring all the paperwork with you if you're trying to prove that you are autistic to someone, to allow them to understand that you have needs within that environment. So the ID card really is something that is very helpful for families, and that can be applied for on our website or by contacting idcards@asiam.ie. We also have our child and family support program, which is absolutely amazing. And I'm saying this as a parent. It's all about clubs all over the country. There's online, there's in person, there's special interest groups, and it's about finding your community and being able to actually really enjoy the activities that should really be something that we all experience as a rite of passage as a child in Irish society, but it's not always accessible for autistic children and teens also. So that's right up to the age of 18. And there's also parent learning platform now, which is called Prepare Me, which is absolutely fantastic. If there's anyone who wants further information on that, that's all on our website. Sorry, this is going backwards. We also have our adult department, which looks after things like coaching for employment, the transition from secondary school into things like apprenticeships or adult services, looking at different clubs and different social connection that you can have within the autistic community. Also, lots of different events, support in creating a CV, your transition into third level, whatever it might be. It's kind of a one-stop shop. Then we have our policy and advocacy piece, which is all about lobbying. Lots of policy work happens within the As I Am team, and it's really kind of fine tuning the voice of the autistic person in advocating for themselves within the Irish kind of social provisions that are available to us. So lobbying is constantly at I suppose, the goals behind the movement that As I Am has become. We've lots of fundraising events as well, and it's really about getting families together, a sense of community, and making sure that everyone is enjoying themselves and supporting our work within As I Am. And then we have our training and accreditation department, which is my area. So it's all about training organizations, businesses, and public bodies who need to complete a number of different steps within an accreditation process. So you might have seen recently, if you follow As I Am social media, that we in January accredited the Houses of Oireachtas, which was Leinster House, which means that anyone that's going in to advocate or attend a committee within Leinster House, that it has become more autism friendly. And you can see from their accessibility page on oireachtas.ie all of the work that actually went into that. Also for school tours going to Leinster House, the museum, all of that is more accessible now as a result. And the whole of, I think there was 1,300 in total that work with the Houses of Oireachtas that attended the training, which was an incredible participation rate for everybody. Now, it's not everybody, we still have work to do, but we got so far to achieve that standard of accreditation within such a large public body. So training is so, so important. It's all about changing our attitudes and thinking about, how we think about providing support for autistic people. we're providing acceptance in so many different ways. And a lot of our thought processes are shaped and geared around the things that happen in Irish society, and also the way we create the programs and curriculums and things that are serving Irish society. Sorry, I just want to check the chat. We're okay. Has everyone got sound and everything is all right? Yes.
Yeah, everyone's good. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, just double checking that I'm not just rambling and no one can hear me. So our training is really about looking at different styles of autistic communication, ways of understanding the barriers that autistic people may experience in their day-to-day lives. So sorry, now this is stuck on me. So we put out a survey, the same chance survey for anyone who holds an ID card, or that is completing surveys. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. So we put out a survey for the autistic community to complete, asking them about their same chance. Their ability to apply for domiciliary care allowance, or to get disability allowance, or it might be, do they find the education system accessible? Do they have to, so you have here some of the stats, 83% feel that they have to mask or change who they are to receive the same chance to participate in day-to-day activities. So if you're looking for any statistics or the perceptions of autistic people and their living experiences in Ireland, you can download our Same Chance report, and you will see all of the findings from that information directly from the autistic community. It's a really interesting read. I highly recommend reading through it. There's some really positive experiences of the education system, and then there's some really negative ones. So it's just not consistent enough. So that's how we know that there's still lots of work to be done in terms of advocacy and ensuring that people feel safe within their work environment or their school environment. So with that, I'm going to give you just a brief insight into our story so far. So this is my little guy when he was little. So when we started out, there was lots of I suppose question marks around Luke's development from family and friends. And I think there was a lot of comparison at the time due to a different style of communication that was emerging, as through play, through interaction with people. He got to around 18 months and he lost all of his words nearly overnight. So we had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what exactly was going on, talking to lots of different professionals, getting information, and making sure that we were doing the right thing as parents. And it can be such a minefield at that point in time. So when he was almost 5 years old, he finally got his official report, which was a cognitive assessment report, to confirm, yes, he was autistic. And that's literally all that was kind of within the report. It didn't really tell us what to do next. It didn't tell us, who to speak to, where to find support, if he needed support. And it was just really a snapshot of where he was at that moment in time. So with all of the unknown around that, I found it really difficult to understand where to next. So it was all about his experience with his siblings, watching, his first experience observing people in close proximity was his relationship with his siblings. So thinking about them getting up in the morning, brushing their teeth, washing their face, getting dressed, all of that kind of thing, was seeing how people go through their day in a very routine and structured way. And he learned a huge amount of that through that social osmosis piece. So, being able to see how they would play, what play looks like. Because for him, play was often quite repetitive. It didn't look like neurotypical play in any way, shape, or form. There was, lots of play with his reflection. He would. Sorry, guys. Yeah. So the relationship, watching that grow, I suppose, from a really early
Oh, do you want to do?
stage of Luke's development, his communication, his ability to interact socially, just even being out in the community was all, growing in confidence as a result of having people in the house with him that he could feel comfortable with. They became a safe space, and it gave him more confidence then to interact with other people outside of that kind of circle. Another thing that we did was we had a service dog, and unfortunately he passed away last year. But we had him from the time Luke was around, I think he was 6 or 7. And it enabled us to go to the local shop for the first time. It enabled us to, go for a walk and not have to worry about things like bolting out, no sense of danger or being spooked by something in the sensory environment, and that fight or flight response that often happens as a result of the unpredictability that's happening around us. That also enabled Luke to learn how to self-regulate, which meant that he could go to things like the barber shop for the first time. He felt safer in those different kind of contexts that he would need to go to as a human being, just going to the GP's office, going to the dentist, the local shop, whatever it might be. So this was Luke last year when we launched our Same Chance report. And you can see there, like, as from the very first picture to there, like, we were told, that he's probably not going to speak like everybody else, and all of the negatives that kind of come with a diagnosis, and that you can be really you can feel completely disconnected from what being a parent is all about, because there's no one kind of going through those experiences with you. You have to figure out a lot of it yourself. It's an emotional roller coaster. You usually have lots of people passing on opinions, and you're experiencing things from a very negative kind of toxic point of view very often, because people see being different as a negative. But actually what we've discovered over the years, kind of getting to this stage that he's at, is that his difference has been the thing that has inspired so many people around him. He is one of the happiest, friendliest, most creative people that I think I've ever known, which is incredible to say that about your own kid. But he is really just such a lovely person, and he has so much potential. But it's trying to, even now we're moving into adult services in September, and it's trying to figure out what are those barriers within those environments that we're going to experience, and how do we sidestep them, how do we knock them over, how do we figure ways around these things. And it all depends on the communication we have with the service. That are they open to hearing? Sometimes it can be constructive criticism, but people don't take that well sometimes. So we have to make sure that the relationship is one that is open, that we can talk about these things from the get-go. So, there's a huge amount of outdated views of the autism spectrum. Many of you will have heard
Okay, that's fine.
lots of different terminology around autism.
I'm on the course.
Sorry, now I'm just going to mute.
No.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can mute everybody, like.
Mute off. Okay. Thank you. Okay, you can still hear me? Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so there are lots of outdated views of the autism spectrum. We will hear people say, or using functional labels like low functioning and high functioning. When you use things like low functioning, a person has low functioning autism, it's the assumption that there are no strengths there. We often don't hear about the strengths that they might have, and we might just make lots of assumptions around their ability to participate in things, to engage. And it can just be that they have a difference in communication style, and that they need extra support in terms of engagement and participation that we can provide. If you hear someone say that they're high functioning, it really does ignore the challenges that they might have, because they're they may not be very apparent, or the rest of society might not experience the challenges that they have because they're a more internalized struggle. And I know as a high functioning autistic person, like I struggle hugely with things like rejection sensitivity or sensory processing, or understanding the nuances sometimes in a conversation, in a group, and trying to process things the same way. So I'm kind of staying in the loop of the conversation. Also, I tend to say things and then get in trouble for it and not realizing that I probably shouldn't have said that, or I should have waited till, the tact sometimes can be a little bit off. So our social compass can be not broken, but I suppose just not on par with everybody else's social compass, because very often we're taking in a lot of other stuff from the environment, and that can skew our understanding sometimes. So instead of looking at that linear model of autism, what we would always advocate for is understanding that there are so many complexities involved in being autistic and in being neurodivergent. So there's differences in communication styles, differences in social interaction, emotional regulation, sensory processing, cognitive processing, and motor skills. So there are autistic people in all walks of life, in all professions, in all cultures. There are no kind of there's nowhere on earth that you haven't had that.
I can't hear the sound now.
Okay, I think we're all right. So sorry, autism is different. So it's understanding that there are different ways of communication, different ways of thinking, and different ways of experiencing the world around us. And what that can mean is that, communication can develop in different ways. It can be delayed, it can be hyper what's the word I'm looking for? Hyperphantasia and things like that, where you are completely consumed by language and you speak at a really rapid rate. And there's lots of different kind of communication profiles within an autism diagnosis that you might experience. But that doesn't mean that they're not autistic or that they don't fit the criteria for an autism diagnosis. Different ways of thinking. Some autistic people are highly visual, some are highly analytical, some are highly creative. It can be literally any type of thinking. And you will find that there are a huge amount of strengths within the diagnosis of an autistic person, but very often all we hear are the negative pieces, because they're the things we're trying to support the person with. So we don't necessarily hear about all of the strengths. The different experiences of the world around us. So the fact that our central nervous system is picking up on these different signals and processing them all at once. So very often there's no kind of background filter to say, oh, that information isn't important. So we're consuming all of this sensory stimuli from the environment at the one time, which can impede on our ability to communicate effectively or to think clearly or to focus. So, we are consumed by our environment a lot of the time. So there is all of the misconceptions that are out there. One that has come back time and time again is that an autistic person is missing a piece from their brain, and it's absolutely untrue. It's been debunked using MRI studies and research, and it actually shows that there's hyperconnectivity in the brain, so more connectivity rather than less, which means that we're hypersensitive or hyposensitive depending on our neuro connections within the brain. Dr. David Rose looked at the Universal Design for Learning framework called CAST, and he really encompasses how we think differently in different environments and how we are impacted by the environment in lots of different ways. So when we're focusing on autism support and best practice around autism, we have to think of it as a neurodevelopmental condition. So that means neuro meaning brain, developmental meaning whole of life, and also changing and pervasive throughout life. So our support needs may change from one time of our lives to the next. It's not something that stays the same all the way through. So it could mean different ways of communicating, different ways of processing information from the environment. Social interaction can be different, and also social imagination. And what I mean by social imagination is if you are, it's more like perspective taking. So seeing things from another person's perspective when you haven't experienced things from their side. So that can sometimes be a block, or that double empathy issue, which is where we're all trying to understand each other from different neurotypes. So that cross neurotype piece of communication. So when I say we differently experience the world, there's a huge amount of sensory sensitivity. So what you might deem to be not, that important or not that distracting might be extremely distracting to an autistic person, whether it's lighting, acoustics, and the textures of clothing, lining and socks. It could be literally anything, types of sound. Loud noises or unpredictable noises can be really overwhelming. Switching activities, so pulling back that all of those kind of tendrils of your minds that have been really intensely focused on a topic area can be really difficult to reel back in and start something new. So we can often get stuck in that hyper focus stage where we're getting lots of work done, and then someone says it's lunchtime. It's really hard to switch off in that moment. Things like people rearranging your things. Very often you'll have, particularly autistic teenagers, you might have someone who's very organized and likes a really tidy room, and if you move anything in the room, they get really upset over it. Or you can have like the floor drobe, where they're literally displaying everything they own, and if you move anything, they get really overwhelmed by it, and it might seem like chaos to some, but it's actually something that's helping them to regulate themselves. There can be sometimes an assumption that an autistic person is rude by the way they communicate, not making eye contact, or maybe not picking up on the social nuances in conversation. But it is the fact that sometimes we think in a very literal way, we'll take the things that you say as at face value. So if there are things like in Ireland, we'll say things like that's deadly, or that's gas, or there's so many different things that we say, like colloquialisms and double meanings, that might be confusing for an autistic person. Not all autistic people, some really enjoy that and find lots of fun in understanding what the double meaning is. So it's important not to make the assumption that everybody has the same way of perceiving language. But it's just, taking it on an individual basis and understanding that we all have a different brain. Literally everybody in the human race has a different brain, but it's a different neurotype that we need to be aware of. So a different operating system. So there's lots of co-occurring conditions that are diagnosed alongside autism. We will hear of things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, intellectual disabilities, other learning disabilities. Things like epilepsy are also fairly common amongst the autistic population. You'll also hear of mental health conditions, bipolar. It's very much down to the individual, their diagnostic kind of criteria, and where they fall, in terms of support needs. So that is what we look at, is support needs. So levels of support. Level 1 meaning just a general amount of support. Level 2, substantial support, and level 3, very substantial levels of support. So that can change throughout the lifespan. For instance, if someone is in a preschool setting, they might need level 2 support. If they move on to primary school, they might need level 1 because the structure suits them, or it could be level 3 because the structure doesn't suit them. So at any stage of an autistic person's life, the support needs can change depending on stress levels, depending on the environmental structure, depending on communication, all of the unsaid things within the environment. So prevalence rates of the autistic population, we used to advocate for 1 in 65 up until probably last year, when the Minister of State, Josepha Madigan, talked about a prevalence rate of 3.38%, which was 1 in 27 school children having a diagnosis of autism. Now, that's not to say that there aren't more, because they are up against barriers such as bureaucracy or financial strain for a family in accessing a diagnosis, waiting lists as well. So sometimes there are barriers to diagnosis for families, which means that they go undiagnosed and they would not be considered within the prevalence rate just yet. So until they actually get to that stage of diagnosis officially, then they're not going to be considered as part of the prevalence rate. So there is a lot of work to be done in figuring out just how much support is required for the general population. As there is a changing demographic, there's a huge need for training, particularly neuroaffirmative training, because we are still so embedded in Ireland in the medical model of service provision. Our special education system is very much embedded within that model, unfortunately. So we would try to advocate for the social model and also a human rights model of disability instead, which means that we're acknowledging the person where they're at, and we're also identifying the barriers that are preventing them from engaging and participating in society. Whereas the medical model would see the person as something to be treated or fixed, or see the person as the issue rather than putting the onus on the environmental design. So that is really problematic in terms of mental health, in terms of practicality. The onus should never be on a person with a disability. It should be on the people responsible for organizing and designing the environment. Because especially for autistic people, the barriers that lie within the sensory environment are one of the biggest prohibitors from actually working in an office, or the COVID-19 pandemic, having hybrid models, more relaxed and flexibility around employment, around schooling, all of that did really go in favor of autistic people, because it means we can work from home, we can go into the office 1 or 2 days a week if needed, or just go up when we need to, so we're a bit more flexible in the way that we think about the structures that we use. Inclusivity and diversity, there's a huge focus on this now, and that social responsibility piece within corporate settings, and the government starting to take kind of things more seriously, in that they're providing best practice guidelines in autism provisions, thinking about parental engagement and how to be more supportive, because the mental health kind of impact on parents of autistic children and parents of anyone who has had to give up their job to be a carer full time, they're going to have mental health implications. They're going to have an impact on the wider family unit, so it can't just be considered from the autistic person's lens. I mentioned the medical model and the social model. This is just a visual to kind of, I suppose, reinforce that concept that the person is never the problem, that it should be considered the way we provide, the activities that we provide. Are we considering a universal design lens here, and what other barriers to engagement and to representation. Sometimes there aren't enough people that would be able to stand up and say, actually, I don't understand what this means, and that representation of information. So having easy read guides for some people, and all of the things that we suggest in becoming autism friendly actually serves the wider population and all needs. So it is more of a universal lens that we would be advocating for in that sense, because, when we say autism friendly, that actually serves people that might have dementia, for instance, or a stressed mother who is going into a post office, and having that easy read guide instead of having to sift through really difficult information on a form, or the lack of ability to focus in a moment's notice when is needed. So just extra accessibility steps that are needed to help people participate and engage. So a huge piece of our work in As I Am, and a lot of people might think it's something that can just be like batted away with it, sure, people will get over it eventually. The judgment and attitudes piece, time and time again in our same chance reports, people talk about this having a huge impact on people's day-to-day living experience. So ableism is that discrimination based on the belief that people with typical abilities are superior, and it's just simply not true. There's so many examples throughout, celebrities, throughout people working in government, wherever in society. There's so much evidence that actually being a neurodivergent person has a huge amount of strengths and positives to offer society on a wider scale. Lots of people employed, for example, in Silicon Valley would be autistic. Like the rate of people that are working on really bespoke projects and having that intense focus and having a really visual thinking style, and all of those things can be extremely positive ways of providing, creativity and innovation in the world. So some ableist remarks that we can hear sometimes: they or you don't look autistic. Okay, so when people say this, I don't know, I think it might be they're trying to make themselves feel better, or I don't know. But like, you can have this kind of response as an autistic person to say, well, there's a special handshake, I'm not really allowed to tell anybody. Or what do you mean by that? Depending on the mood you're in, because sometimes you just want to go, oh, for God's sake, really, again, you're asking me that question. Or this is just how we part his hair on that day. Like, you can feel like you just need to get away from the person that's saying this. But when you ask them, what do you mean by that? You're calling them out on their actual understanding of autism and what it means to be autistic, and what kind of learning that they need to look at. So it's almost like a question that prompts them to think, actually, I need to learn a little bit more about this topic. Another one, everyone's a little bit autistic. So everyone gets cold, but that does not make them ice cream. So lots of people can have specific traits that they can relate to in terms of autistic experience, but that does not make them autistic. So for instance, being highly noise sensitive, that doesn't mean you're autistic. Having any one of those kind of traits, like, oh, I'm very literal in the way I speak, that doesn't mean you're autistic either. It's about meeting all of the different areas that meet the criteria in terms of sensory processing, in terms of communication, in terms of social interaction. So there's a huge amount of complexity that goes with getting a diagnosis of autism. So when people say everyone's a little bit autistic, it waters down our experience. It almost gaslights us into thinking, actually, it's not that big a deal. Your struggles on a daily basis aren't that bad. Get over it, and it can be debilitating. Like, sometimes it's really difficult to leave the house as a result of being autistic because of the unpredictability in the environment. So it's important that people aren't watering down autistic experience, and we feel validated for who we are as people, and we're supported in that regard as well. Another one, as a parent, you hear lots of is, wow, you're so brave. Which, yeah, it's not it again, it's kind of watering down, not watering down, but trying to relate to someone or big them up or feel like that they have to say something for the sake of saying something. Like, I don't think it's brave to love my child. That's our job as parents. And people have the best of intentions, they really do, and they mean really well. But what can happen is all of these comments can kind of impact you later on after you've thought about something, and that can later on then impact on your overall mental health. So our words really do matter. We have a language guide, and As I Am, which is freely downloadable off our website, but I can certainly link it in with Rachel if anyone wants a copy sent across. So you will hear things like suffers from autism from time to time, which is again embedded within the medical model of disability, and it's just not accurate. It's awful to think that someone would assume that someone suffers from autism. You don't suffer from autism, you suffer from an environment that is unpredictable. You suffer from a society that doesn't understand, that hasn't um, found ways of making things more accessible. Being on the spectrum, again, goes back to that linear model of autism where you have high functioning and low functioning. Again, we want to throw that in the bin. So we say autism on the spectrum a lot, or people with autism, but that kind of gives the idea that a person is carrying their autism around with them and it's separate to them. Like, you wouldn't say person with gayness or person with Irishness. So ideally what we go with is autistic person, he, she, or they are autistic. And we use identity first language because it's all about shifting the narrative, kind of debunking those ableist views and creating a positive sense of identity around being autistic. So developing special interests. This is a story I like to talk about for my own son, and it kind of gives an idea around the different styles of communication. So, um, like, I think around the age of 8 years old, Luke started drawing this face all over my house. He had it on every blank surface, every wall, every calendar, you name it, it was there. And what I realized very quickly, can anyone guess as to what it was? It's not me, by the way.
Is it himself? No.
It's not himself. It's not a self-portrait, no.
Is it a character?
It is a character.
I'm leaning towards Jack from Nightmare Before Christmas.
No, but that would have been so cool. I love that. But
The
no.
Grinch?
It is the Grinch. Well done. Okay. So, the Grinch was a very big character in our house from this age onward. And what happened was he watched it one day in school and immediately started identifying with the character of it. Okay. So if we think about the Grinch, what did he do? He stole Christmas, and that is the main thing. So, on the lead up to Christmas, Luke absolutely hated it, and he guesses as to why.
The
Over
noises, like sensory
overstimulation.
Overstimulation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally, if you think about it, absolutely everything in the environment shifts into hyperdrive. It's completely consumed by music, by cues, by parking, by shopping. What else? Tinsel, lights flashing, all of the things, okay, around Christmas. So what happened was he started to get overwhelmed, and the idea of being the Grinch and the person in control of Christmas would take over. So I caught him one day trying to pull the Christmas tree out of the sitting room door, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he started like spouting quotes from the Grinch movie. And then another time we were walking through our local shop, and you can picture my entourage. I had uh, our dog Toby, I had Luke tethered to him, I had a buggy, and with a toddler and another child kind of walking beside me. So full entourage walking through the shop. And the next thing, this lady is standing in front of us with her basket of shopping, and he starts taking everything out and throwing it over his shoulder. Because it was a scene in The Grinch and there was music playing and it was busy and he didn't want to be there anymore. So this was his way of communicating that. Now, the whole point of that story, right? I could have walked by this drawing that he had all over every surface in our house. Have kind of back and forth play around the Grinch. We'd start using the movie quotes as a dialogue to engage with each other. And what I realized before long was this was his play. And it was like not what you'd regularly expect of an 8-year-old child to be kind of back and forth with movie quotes and drawing and things like that. But the speech wasn't quite developed in a way that everyone else would understand. But this was our love language in a lot of ways. And we built on that and built on that. And it turned into this absolute graw for drawing and for, we call it verbal tennis in our house. Like, so the siblings got involved, his dad got involved, and we have like cousins and all of that would do it with him as well. But he started drawing full scenes. Then you can see from the second picture from Pixar movies, that's from Cars. And if you look closely, you can see the detail that he's actually put into it. He has license plates, he has expressions on the cars' faces, he has numbers on the scoreboards, he has the crowd kind of in the distance. Like, it's all about perspective. Then he went on to drawing movie logos, 20th Century Fox, looking at again perspectives and also looking at how the images would move across the screen like in a video, but he would sketch them all out one by one and create like comic book stories based on this. And one day he came in to me with his iPad and he handed this to me. So this was something that was really amazing in our house because we had no idea he had the ability to do that, first of all. And then we found out that he had such a huge set of skills that he had done kind of all self-taught, all intrinsically motivated to learn about how to recreate the things that he really loved. But putting in things like Doyle Studios and personalizing things and redrawing things from his own perspective were so fascinating. Like, he used to do videos of his cars when they were lined up in a certain way, and then he'd do a voiceover. And we noticed that when he did a voiceover, his speech was perfect. Like, it was really well rehearsed, it was pronounced perfectly, but yet we couldn't have a conversation in real time. So it just shows kind of the different ability and that iceberg effect that just from what we see on the surface doesn't really tell us very much about what's going on beneath the surface for an autistic person. So it really is important that the skill sets that are emerging are nurtured. And these were some of the calendars that he used to draw on. One of the latest deep dives he's done is on the Tangiwai Railway disaster of 1953. Very specific, you can see there, but that's all from studying on YouTube, different kind of clips, different variations of videos. He's also done a deep dive on the Federal Railroad Administration health and safety reports. And the funny thing is, like, what he comes home with from school is this. So, counting shamrocks and jolly phonics. And to be honest, it's soul destroying as a parent to see this coming back in the door after looking at summers of trailing through accident and emergency reports and things like that. Now, his dad is a health and safety officer, which is really interesting that he would go that route. And I'm not sure if he knows what his dad does, but he's certainly very interested in that area of work in terms of accidents with trains or planes in transport and things like that, and what people do afterwards to troubleshoot. You know, what happens if a train breaks? Who fixes it? What are the things that we need to know in order to make things right again? And I suppose that tells an awful lot about autistic understanding and the research that we do in a particular topic. I know when I was a kid that my fascination with Enrique Iglesias led me to want to learn Spanish, and I became fluent in Spanish eventually due to that, you know, interest in a particular area. I never met Enrique Iglesias, but I did have a massive crush on him all the way through my teens. But it just goes to show that that motivation can sometimes be an intrinsic thing in our thought processes and not necessarily about what other people are expecting of us or kind of gearing us up to do. So that adult-led learning piece is always initiated with an agenda. It seeks to control, it follows a structure, and the focus is always on skill development. Whereas if we allow a child to explore their environment, to, you know, figure things out on their own for a bit, it begins with that observation piece. It explores a connection, whether it's with objects or people, it doesn't matter, because it's about their learning and about their adaptation to the environment and the things that they're connecting with. And it's centered on areas of interest. Lots of the areas of interest for autistic children um, are those, that tendril theory that I talked about, that it's really difficult to switch from one thing to another. And it's trying to find ways that make it practical to use that in different areas of our life. But in an enjoyable way, not in a way where we take control of it and they're no longer interested in it, you know. So we have to reveal their motivation and zest and support them to love the things that they love even more, you know, support them in discovering that bit more information to feed that thirst for knowledge that they might have. Okay. So the differences in communication methods, if you think about it, there's so many different ways that we communicate. We have speech, vocalizations, words, sentences, phrases, augmentative and alternative communication devices, which is your phone, your iPads, your text to speech, facial expressions, pointing, signing, symbols, alphabet charts, pen and piece of paper, which is what we use in our house, as simple as that. Books, objects, electronic devices, crying, you know, our emotions really do help us to communicate. Echolalia, which is the repetition of words and phrases or songs and sounds. Pointing, gestures, yeah, speech to text. There's so many different ways that we communicate that are important. And what's important to note is that verbal ability is not the one thing that defines our intelligence. Very often there's so much happening for a person who communicates in a different way. And they're well able to do the things that sometimes we can assume they can't do as a result of the lack of speech sometimes. So just to be mindful that that can be the case. Literal interpretation. So the first photograph there, any guesses as to the phrase I might be referring to?
Let's guess.
Yeah. Okay. The next one.
Eye on the ball.
Well done.
Raining cats and dogs.
Yeah.
Paper cut.
Not paper cut,
Corners.
cutting corners. Well done.
I'm neurodivergent.
Say what you see.
Yeah,
Well done.
ADHD.
Skeleton in the closet. Well done. Last one. Elephant in the room. Fabulous. Okay, so you can see like all of the different things. If you had visual oh my God, my words, representation of what those things are in your conversation. So if someone was standing there just kind of literally interpreting what you're saying as you're saying it, it might not always look like what you intended to say. So we can't always kind of perceive the intention behind what people mean. So when we're working with neurodivergent people, it is important to say what we mean, particularly if you don't know the person, because it's very hard to judge, if someone is joking or if they're being sarcastic, or all of the kind of double meaning behind our intent to communicate can be very debilitating. When you get to know a person, it's a lot easier because they're a joker, or you're gonna feel more comfortable around it. But when you first meet somebody and they start using things like that's gas, or it can take you that bit longer to process the meaning that they have. How are we doing on time, Rachel? Are we 45 minutes in yet?
Yeah, we are, Zara. So I was gonna kind of let it roll, but I think if people wanted to take a quick 5 minute stretch break.
Yeah, if you want to do that, that's fine. So will we come back for?
So say it's 20 past, so 12:20.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, I'll see you all back then.
Perfect.
Okay, so welcome back, everybody. So just to get back straight into things, so this is just an introduction to how our sensory systems might impact on an autistic person. So our sensory systems play a crucial role in how individuals might perceive and interact with the world around them. There's lots of sensory sensitivities with regard to sensory stimuli such as sounds, lights, textures, smells, tastes, and even certain movements as well. So, for example, finding certain noises, like loud or sudden noises, overwhelming or painful, these sensitivities can lead to discomfort, anxiety, and even meltdowns or shutdowns. So for anyone who was at our previous events last year, you will have heard me talk a lot about our autonomic nervous system, and the impact that our senses can have on all of that. So just to bring you on to the next. Our hyposensitivity, so our low arousal, which means that we might be seeking things in the environment to stimulate our senses. So if things seem too dark or dull, you might find that you're walking around with your phone on the highest possible brightness. You're, turning on all the lights in the house. You're seeking out bright things or colorful things, visual stimulation. Little sense of smell, so not being able to pick up on the signs of danger. So you might spray too much perfume on, or have lots of candles around the house all lighting at the same time with different scents, because you're trying to awaken the sense of smell to send that signal so you can process the environment. Things can seem too quiet, so you can have a person who is trying to fill all of the kind of corners of the room with sound because they're uncomfortable with the silence. They have a low sensitivity for sound, or not being able to pick up on certain things, certain frequencies, preferring strong flavors, so seeking out more intense experiences through food, like really salty, really sweet, really sour kind of flavors. Needing constant contact, so that physical kind of contact with someone, being very kind of huggy or tactile, or wanting to squeeze objects and things like that, needing something constantly to feel safe sometimes. Seeking out imbalance, I often talk about the child that's on top of the swing set as opposed to sitting on the swing. Gross motor skills can be difficult for some people who have hyposensitivity. So sometimes it's processing the signal to your brain using things like big motor movements. So it could be cycling a bike, for instance, or being able to process the motor memory in time to do the activity. May not notice emotions. So again, you can be totally consumed by all of the other senses and information within the environment that you're not noticing how people are feeling within the emotional environment. So it could be that someone is crying, but you're not picking up on why they're crying, or may not realize may not realize that a person is happy or upset or crying for a particular reason. There may be an assumption, say, that someone is crying because they're sad when actually they're happy. So the misinterpretation of the meaning behind why we do certain things. Hypersensitivity then, so things can seem too bright. So you might find someone squinting a lot or wearing a hood or a cap or sunglasses perhaps. Smells can be overwhelming. So like if you think about it from a neurotypical point of view, going into somewhere that smells would be overwhelming, would be going into a food court, for instance, in a shopping center, and there's lots of different kind of food stalls or restaurants, and all of the smells are coming at you in the one kind of area. But for someone who has hypersensitivity to smell, it means that even shower gel people use or hand sanitizer or, you know, really subtle smells to other people can seem really overwhelming to others. So they're more capable of picking up on those kind of not threats, but those sensations within the environment. Things can seem too loud, so that need to cover your ears or to control the vibration in your inner ear to make sure that you aren't going to be hurt by the sound. So anything unpredictable, anything that's a certain frequency or pitch can actually be very painful for a lot of people due to hypersensitivity. Preferring bland foods, so going for the safe foods, going for the the beige diet, the things that you know aren't going to upset your digestive system. And that can be why we have that repetition piece. We just feel that those foods are within our comfort zone. Touching can hurt. So I always give the kind of analogy that if you're standing in the zoo and at the tiger enclosure and the glass shatters between you and the tiger, how are you going to feel in that instance? Immediately your body is in a state of shock and stress and not able to process what exactly you need to do to survive. And if someone walks up behind you and puts their hand on your shoulder, you're going to feel in extra kind of overwhelm. You might have that jump response, you might run, you might, you don't know how you're going to react in that situation. But processing that in a high anxiety state when you're hypersensitive can feel like that in an everyday situation where you're feeling overwhelmed. So sometimes it can be a big struggle with touch and being tactile. So avoidance can very often happen around crowds. Fine motor skills can be difficult. The sensitivity to holding a pen for long amounts of time or using a key or tying a shoelace or, all of those kind of smaller motor movements and coordination particularly. So like I'm dreadful for opening the milk, for instance, or a jar or something. I would have lots of kind of, things that I just hand to my husband and go, please, I don't have the patience or the coordination to open this. And he's just looking at me going, you are ridiculous. But genuinely, like it can be so stressful trying to do certain things like that when you're feeling overwhelmed. Sensitivity to emotions, so that hyper empathy piece, particularly if you have ADHD as well. I think Faye was it mentioned in the chat as well, that rejection sensitivity piece, that you can be very susceptible to other people's reaction to certain things in the environment, and you can carry it with you for time afterwards, and it can be very difficult to dispose of that energy from your thinking and from the way you're conducting yourself in the environment, and you can just feel overwhelmed by other people's emotions, and it can be the very same for autistic people as well. So it's important to note, sorry, just before I go on to the next bit, that all of these things are fluctuating. It's like a weather system. Whether you're hypersensitive one moment, you could be hyposensitive in the next hour or whatever. Like, so it's not something that stays stagnant. Sometimes we have more need or more likely to be prone to certain kind of sensory profiles, but again, it changes over time. It's not something that stays the same forever. It's just something that we need to observe about ourselves and figure out what our coping strategies are in lots of different situations. Okay, so this is a video example of what it might be like on a train situation for a young woman. I'm just going to play. Let me know if you have any issues with hearing or anything like that.
We're sorry to announce that the train has been delayed. Please listen for further announcements. This train is diverted.
Sorry.
I'm autistic, and the fear of unexpected changes can make leaving the house impossible.
Okay. Yeah, so some things that you might have noticed there was that the young lady was stimming. Stimming is self-stimulating behaviors like arm flapping, rocking. It can be pacing. It can be also internalized stimming, where it could be a song or a word or a phrase going around and around in your head. And it helps you actually to regulate your emotions, but also the sensory stimulation that you might be feeling. So it's really important that we allow a person to have the space to stim and give them the grace that they need to, recover or de-escalate from an overwhelming situation. Sometimes we stim for pure joy, and sometimes we stim because we're stressed. It's all about allowing our system to process all of the different information we're receiving. So it is that balance between fight or flight and that rest and digest, and we can often get stuck in either side. So if we're constantly anxious about something, it might mean that we haven't had time to process and it's kind of, we've used all of our energy to process the environment for too long, and we've lost the ability to calm ourselves down and regulate in a way that's meaningful. And then our parasympathetic activation is our rest and digest. So needing to just be at home, very difficult to shift back into work mode after a holiday. You might relate to that. So, there's different ways that it can impact on a person, but, it can be debilitating either way if you're leaning more towards one or the other. A meltdown is described as a loss of control, which shows itself externally. So things like crying, it could be shouting, it could be running away, it could be, a meltdown can look different for absolutely everybody, and it is externalized reaction to the environment. Shutdown is described as a more internal experience where it can feel like you're completely shutting down. It's a power off button almost. You want to just go to your bed, pull a duvet over your head, and not be engaging with the world around you. So social interaction, autistic people must learn scientifically what non-autistic people learn instinctively. So that's so important to remember. Our social interaction differences can look like finding turn taking difficult, may not understand boundaries or personal space because it might not have been communicated to them what's expected of them in certain situations, may need recovery time from overwhelming social situations, may not initiate questions or respond appropriately, and may only talk about the topics that interest them. So that's safety, that comfort zone within a certain topic, and may find it difficult to maintain friendships as a result of the social complexities that we have on a day-to-day, with family members or with other students or, anybody really. We tend to have better relationships with the people we know on a more intimate level. be it a parent, a partner, a good friend, you know, like a long-term friend. What can happen is masking can take over when we're in situations where we're not feeling very comfortable, we have to feel like we fit in. So masking is when an autistic person either consciously or subconsciously hides their natural autistic behaviors and responses. So things like forcing eye contact, is a form of masking, rehearsing conversations before entering a social situation, mirroring other people's behavior, hiding stress, hiding the need to stim, and then hiding personal interests. So sometimes you'll hear parents talk about, oh, when they get home from such and such, whether it's school or a day out, they're, you know, really upset, or they're falling apart, or you know, they're just not themselves. It can be as a result of that stress response, which is masking. And it can drain a huge amount of social energy from us and leave us with a very low social battery at the end of the day. So the things that charge us are stimming, special interests, sensory preferences, and where you can be yourself, where you're in your comfort zone, and know people well, and things are predictable. The daily routine, self-care, making plans can be the things that start to drain our battery, and we have to kind of keep aside certain amounts of energy in order to be able to do these things. But the most taxing parts of our day are the uncertainty, social anxiety, processing environmental stimuli, and trying to live up to other people's expectations of us. Autistic fatigue and burnout tends to be a very intense way of getting to your limit. So you might experience loss of skills, increased sensitivity, more frequent stimming, more frequent meltdowns, and chronic exhaustion, where you just need time out from everything, time to, you know, just recover from a very tiring situation. So it's important that we manage our needs within the environment, and I'm going to go into how we can do that next. So the reasons why managing needs is important, obviously, to reduce anxiety, to increase predictability, things like wayfinding, being able to find the place that you need to get to in order to do X, Y, and Z. Being able to advocate for your own needs, so self-advocacy has to be a huge part of your learning, and acceptance of yourself, and then independence from, you know, the family unit. So we do all of these things through reasonable accommodations, and by applying that universal design to support autistic people. So if you're in a practitioner kind of role and you're looking to support an autistic person, it's important to consider the needs, acknowledge what your capabilities are in the moment, and figure out how to accommodate them as best as you can. So some of the parameters we have within As I Am that are free to download for people are our communication stickers, for example. So now there's different variations of this system, but it just gives people a visual to understand how someone communicates, or how someone is feeling about communicating, which is often more the case for a lot of people. So green is I'm happy to talk to everybody. Orange, I'm happy to talk to people I know, or the people I came with, or people I've met before. And then red, I don't want to talk right now, and it's just give me some space, you know. So rather than put the onus on the person to tell you how they're feeling, you can see it, it's visual, you know when to keep your distance at, you know, whatever they're trying to communicate. So the different types of communication of information can look like the following. So social media, website, social scripts, staff ID badges, knowing a person's name. Sometimes we have face blindness or facial agnosia, where we're not actually able to recognize people by their face. It's more about maybe their smell or their hair, or the way that they dress. So it's not necessarily about their face. 360 videos are really helpful of a new environment. So if you have a new clubhouse, or if you new kind of community hall that you're using for groups, for instance, having that 360 video of the room to send on a WhatsApp to the parent or the child is really helpful. Providing WhatsApp voice notes instead of just your your text-based kind of communication is something that can be really helpful for some. And they just process that information better that way. And you can ask for their preference, when they sign up to a group, for instance. Having a sensory map is really helpful. Having a schedule, knowing what to expect, instructions as to how or what your expectations are of the young person when they come into that space. Any visual or video tutorials of the activities that you might be doing, just to give them forewarning or that preparation material before they enter the environment. And then if you have any kind of like subtitles, can be really helpful on in the background of a group. So we use an app called iTranscribe. It's on the Google Play Store, I believe, but I think there are Apple versions as well. And what it does is it turns everyday conversation into subtitles. So the person has an extra layer of social connection there. They're not relying on the words as they're coming out of someone's mouth, because sometimes processing delay can be a barrier to them actually engaging in different activities. So that's just one thing that we do. But there are lots of different kind of ways of creating a more universally accessible environment. Some of the things that are important for sensory consideration: lighting. So fluorescent lighting can be really difficult to deal with. Patterns or visual kind of clutter around an environment. If a place is very, cluttered with chairs and desks and things like that, that can be a barrier because that's all we're focusing on. Or if there's very kind of detailed carpet or tapestry or paintings or whatever, that can be distracting. Noise levels and types of sound. So if you have like bells going off, or if you have phones in the background, people watching videos on their phones. That's why a train or public transport can be quite distracting for many. So you'll see the noise cancelling headphones on. Presentation of information, really important as well. All of these things may lead to overwhelm. So you can create a checklist of the environment, consider all of the sensory triggers, think of it in if at your most delicate state. So sometimes it can be when you're feeling unwell, for instance, and you start looking around the room and you start thinking, oh God, it's very bright, turn off the big light, or I might use a lamp in future. What could I do to troubleshoot these things? It's all about paying close attention and think about things from the young person's perspective, and the things you've noted through observations, or the things that maybe a parent has told you that the young person is struggling with. A sensory space can be used for privacy, recovery, de-escalation. It's a designated calming space, free of excess noise, of lots of movement, where people can self-soothe or refocus as needed. Different supports that you can have on site would be noise cancelling buds or headphones, or even just let them know they can bring theirs is enough. You don't have to go through to any expense for it. Most autistic people that struggle with hypersensitivity in terms of noise will have noise cancelling headphones in their own kind of toolkit of sensory supports. Sunglasses, a peaked cap or hood, awareness of visual clutter and lighting, cushions or choice of seating. So having bean bags or hard seating and soft seating, or just to think a little bit about what's comfortable and what's not, because sometimes that can be a source of stress. Calming fidget or stim tools, so things like stress balls, stretchy objects, weighted lap pads can be helpful as well, if feeling kind of stimmy, as I like to say. Visual guide, labels, put some structure on the environment so we can figure out where we're supposed to go if we're making a cup of tea, for instance. Like, where do we find all the things we need in order to do that? Or if we're making tea for everybody else, is there a sign on the door for the bathroom, or how to exit or enter a place? Are they familiar with the environment? So it's really about making things predictable. Use visual aids where possible, think about what can be done, what can't be done, and what will happen if the rules are broken. If it's not written down, it's very unlikely that a person can process it when they need to. So if they're not sticking to the rules, sometimes it can just be a fact that they weren't aware of them in the first place. So there's lots of different kind of publications there around I suppose the topics or the themes that were picked up on from the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Autism. Again, freely downloadable off the Oireachtas website, but it gives you more detail in terms of disability services, education, social protection, health and well-being, and housing and homelessness, and other topics as well. But just to note that inclusive education or even community engagement should not just be about including people in mainstream groups or classrooms or building autism classes. It's really about ensuring that families have the confidence within the service that they're attending, that they're inclusive, that they're promoting an inclusive culture, that they're embracing those principles of universal design, and that these systems are accessible for everybody. So I suppose there is a huge evolution happening. And if you consider that the different stages that we've gone through in terms of inclusion, you have your exclusion, you have your segregation, integration, and we all talk about inclusion. It's such a buzzword, really. And it's really important to establish what is coming next. So I am going to finish there. So I'm happy to take any questions from anyone. It's all really about learning about autism, getting to know the autistic person you're supporting, and figuring out what parts of the universal design within the environment are beneficial for that young person. And that's how we make things more accessible. I will leave that on in the background. Happy